that you have to follow during this public lecture. First, please spell your full name. Second, participants are required to turn on the camera and turn off the microphone, or unless authorized to turn on the microphone by the moderator. Third, if participants want to ask questions in Q&A session, please ask the questions at the following link, bit.ly/Q&A public lecture 2021. The committee will provide a certificate by email based on the list of attendance from public lecture participants who fill out the feedback form. Before starting our event today, first, let's pray based on our own belief. Praying, start. There's no enough in praying. So, public lecture 2021 officially begins. Today's event contains several sections. The first section is a welcoming speech from Project Officer Public Lecture 2021, followed by Mr. Budiawan as Head of Chemistry Department, Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, Universitas Indonesia. Second is the main lecture from Professor Usman Sumo Tambunan, and followed with the main lecture from Dr. Alexandra Dainis. The third is the discussion section, and for the last, there will be a quiz and some prizes for the lucky participants. Before we start this event, let's prepare ourselves to sing our national anthem, Indonesia Raya.
Indonesia, tanah airku, tanah tumpah darahku. Di sanalah aku berdiri, jadi pandu hidupku. Indonesia, kebangsaanku, bangsa dan tanah airku. Marilah kita bersatu, Indonesia bersatu.
Hiduplah tanahku, hiduplah negeriku, bangsaku, rakyatku, semuanya. Bangunlah jiwanya, bangunlah badannya untuk Indonesia Raya. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka, tanahku, negeriku yang tercinta. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka, hiduplah Indonesia Raya. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka, tanahku, negeriku yang tercinta. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka, hiduplah Indonesia Raya.
Thank you. Now, without any further ado, let's begin this event with the greetings from Anissa Maharani as Project Officer of Public Lecture 2021. For Miss Anissa, time is yours.
Thank you, Sylvia. The Honorable Chairman of Chemistry Department, Dr. Budiawan, Metabolism Class B lecturer, and also our speaker, Professor Usman Sumo Tambunan, our speaker, Dr. Alexandra Dainis, researchers, lecturers, students, and all participants that have joined these events. Good morning, and I hope you're all in good condition. Let me introduce myself. I'm Anissa Maharani, and I'm representing Metabolism Class B. Welcome to Public Lecture 2021. In March 2020, COVID-19 hits our country hard. We were all forced to change how we live our lives. Students start learning from homes, businesses close, and the government mandated several lockdowns throughout the year. Today, it's been over a year since then, and yet we still see no end to this pandemic. And now we are facing a new stage of COVID-19 pandemic, where vaccines are being delivered, and woefully, the virus starts to mutate. As students of University of Indonesia, we need to take action upon issues that emerge in our country. Currently, one of the most prominent issues is the lack of awareness towards the possible imminent threat by the COVID-19 mutation. Also, people are still skeptical about the efficacy of vaccines. From these issues, me and my friends feel that we have an obligation to provide a platform for everyone to get adequate information regarding vaccines' effectivity upon COVID-19 virus mutation. And that is exactly why we are here today. I truly hope that everyone could enjoy the event and get valuable information from our speakers. And I also hope that we can get over this pandemic as soon as possible. Thank you. Back to you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Ms. Anissa, for the speech.
Now we're going to give our attention to the welcoming speech from Mr. Budiawan as Head of Chemistry Department, Faculty Mathematics and Natural Science, Universitas Indonesia. Mr. Budiawan, the time and place is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gabriela and Ms. Sylvia, as MC in this webinar. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my centenary greeting to our distinguished guest, Dr. Alexander Dainis from Stanford University, California, USA, and also our Honorable Professor Dr. Usman Sumo from Tambunan from Department of Chemistry, Faculty of Mathematics and Science, University Indonesia. And not forget to all ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to participate in this webinar public lecture program. Very good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It is my great pleasure to extend you all very well welcome to our web program today. On behalf of the Department of Chemistry, Faculty Mathematics and Natural Sciences, Universitas Indonesia, I would like to convey a thank you, especially to our guest speaker, Dr. Alexander Dainis, and Mr. Muhammad Al-Afiki as moderator in this public lecture, and also all the participants who spend the time and dedicated to attend to our webinar public lecture today. I have informed that according to the agenda today, Dr. Alexander Dainis, she will deliver a very interesting and very important topic, namely COVID-19 vaccine versus virus mutation. And there is the question, when will the pandemic end? I think this is very interesting, a very valuable type of thema that we would like to discuss today. And we hope from this webinar, our guest speaker, Dr. Alexander, you could share your knowledge and also your expertise with our students, especially also to all participants. Furthermore, we will get a good news, we hope, for the question to answer. When will the pandemic end? Because, you know, pandemics, virus COVID, I think is very, very harmful for us, for all the world. Yeah, I'm the one of, I think, get the virus for COVID-19 because I was have rest for one and a half month because the infections from the virus. So we hope from this seminar we can discuss and the question, the answer to have in this today's seminar. Furthermore, to all the participants, I would like to declare officially the opening of webinar. Congratulations and success. Have a pleasant time, and enjoy the seminar. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Budiawan, for the welcoming speech. It was such a pleasure to have you here.
Before we go to the next agenda, I would like to remind you to change your name on Zoom with your full name. Okay, thank you everyone. Now we will move to the main event. Before that, it is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's discussion. Muhammad Al-Hakiki is an undergraduate student of Chemistry Department, Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, Universitas Indonesia. Hakiki has received many achievements. He is the first runner-up most outstanding student of Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, Universitas Indonesia, awardee of Bidik Misi Scholarship and NTB Syariah Bank Scholarship, and has received outstanding achievements in more than 10 competitions. Hakiki is also a founder of Lombok Terus Belajar, and he has had 8 other experiences in leadership and organizations. So without any further ado, would you please welcome Mr. Hakiki?
Hi, thank you to the MC for introducing me. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Hakiki and I am as a moderator for this event. Every year, we conducted public lecture and today we are presenting public lecture 2021 with the interesting title, which is COVID-19 vaccine versus virus mutation. When will this pandemic end? That will be presented by our 2 amazing speakers that I will be introduced to all of you later. This public lecture will also be broadcast live via our Professor YouTube channel, and you can type Usman Bajanet Pun in YouTube, so everyone will have access to our public lecture. And just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any question during the presentation, please type into bit.ly/Q&A public lecture 2021. I will bring some of the most liked questions during the presentation to our speaker because we also have time for a question and answer at the end. Besides of that, we also have questions from participants from registration form. Now, without any further ado, I will introduce you to our first speaker. So our first speaker is Professor Usman Sumo Tambunan. He's a professor of biochemistry in the chair of Bioinformatics Research Group, Department of Chemistry, Universitas Indonesia. He earned his doctoral degree in chemistry from Tohoku University, Japan, and her postdoctoral research at Kansas University Battle Memorial Institute, Columbus, Ohio, USA. He also has a ton of professional experience and awards, including 3rd place for Best Professor and Researcher in Science and Technological Universitas Indonesia. With a more than 150 publications and up to 900 citations, H index 60, he conducted research on bioinformatics for biomedical science in research fields of drug design and screening, vaccine design, or primer design in the topic of Ebola virus, avian influenza, dengue virus, cancer, diabetes mellitus, tuberculosis, and coronavirus. He currently has ongoing project to discover epitope-based vaccine design for SARS-CoV-2. He also got grants from Indonesian Ministry of Education and Culture and Research, as well as Community Service Council of University of Indonesia. And now, please welcome to our first speaker, Professor Usman Sumo Tambunan. The time is yours.
Morning, evening to everyone who joined this webinar for this morning. Thank you for the time, especially to my colleagues, Dr. Alexandra Dainis from United States, and my colleague from Singapore, Malaysia, and my colleague for several part of this country, Udayana, Bali, Surabaya, Malang, Yogyakarta, Bandung, Bogor, also from Kalimantan, Lombok, Sulawesi, Lampung, Jambi, North Sumatra, especially my colleague from Universitas Indonesia, the student, and also my colleague from Rumah Sakit Polri, my colleague from Minister of Health of this country,
So I think our professor have trouble with their signal. So we have to wait a minute for our professor to come back to our meeting. Thank you. So yeah, right now currently we have 119 participants in this webinar, and they from the Indonesia and across the abroad country from Singapore and also from the USA and many countries across the globe. And yeah, I think I will ask to the participant why you join this webinar. I think based beside the title of our webinar is interesting. The virus mutation versus the vaccine. So is there any reason that you join for our webinar? Yeah. Several participants tells me that he joined the webinar because our second speakers, Dr. Alex Dainis, that he came from Stanford University, and most of our participants interest to join our webinar because of that.
Can anybody contact Prof. Usman, please?
Yes, our committee is contacting him right now. We are so sorry for the inconvenience, maybe because this is an online webinar, so there are a lot of technical problems. So we are so sorry for the inconvenience once again.
Baru share lagi. Baru share lagi.
So yeah, I guess Professor Usman is already joined our webinar again, and yeah, show the slide. Thank you.
Wait a minute.
Thank you, Professor, for coming back. Yeah. Yeah, you can start again your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Ini kan. Kenapa bisa begitu? Ini nih, siapa yang?
So, Professor, your slideshow is not full. Would you please show the full of your presentation?
It's already okay? It's already okay, Mr. Chairman? Can you hear me?
It's okay,
Hello?
but could you please make us a slideshow, please?
Your slide is not full. It's not ready for.
It's not ready
Yeah,
for?
yeah, it's already full. Yeah, you
It's
can
already
start
full?
again your presentation, Prof. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for the time, especially to my guest, Dr. Alexandra Dainis from United States, and also my colleague from UK, Singapore, and Malaysia, and also my colleague from several parts of this beautiful country, Udayana, Bali, Surabaya, Malang, Yogyakarta, Bandung, Bogor, and also Lombok, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, Lampung, Jambi, North Sumatra, and also my colleague from Rumah Sakit Polri, from Ministry of Health, and all participants. Thank you for the time. This morning, I will share with you my presentation entitled COVID-19 Forced Vaccination in Indonesia, not a free fast. Before we begin to talk about Indonesia condition in this pandemic, I would like to talk first about the global situation. Until now, we have been in this pandemic for approximately 1 year and 3 months. After the outbreak, in Wuhan, WHO declared public health emergency of international concern status for this disease on January 2020.
I think
Yeah, I think our professor have trouble again for this signal.
yes.
So I would like to ask our MC, what do you think about our webinar? Why you join this webinar? What are your reasons for joining this webinar?
So I think it's a very interesting topic right now because we know that our biggest problem right now is COVID-19, right? And we have heard a lot about news that talk about COVID-19. Is it the mutation, and then the impact of the economy and something like that. So I think it is very interesting to learn more about COVID-19.
Yeah. We also have many questions about the virus mutation that already happened in several countries. Several people ask that is it possible to get a vaccine again to the virus mutation? So I think the people join our webinar is joined because the reason of that. So now our committee from the event is started to have our professor to show their presentation. Yeah, the slideshow. Yeah, the slide is ready show.
No.
Is our professor is already join our webinar?
Yes, so but a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, professor, you can start again your presentation.
Yes.
Your slide will have to show by our staff.
That's also.
Bukan itu tadi boleh file yang tadi PPT file presentasi. Stop sharing. Ya. Oke. Buka file yang tadi. Bukan file presentasi Bapak ketutup tadi.
So yeah, Professor, if you have still have a mistakes about your channel or problem with your slideshow to your presentation, our event committee will help you to show your presentation, and you just present your presentation from our event committee.
Yes. Can you help me? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. The committee of event, please show our professor presentation. Yeah, it's already show. To our Professor Usman, you can start again your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Before we begin to talk about Indonesia condition in this pandemic, I would like to talk first about the global situation. Until now, we have been in this pandemic for approximately 1 year and 3 months. After the outbreak in Wuhan, WHO declared public emergency of international concern status for this disease on January 2020. After the condition was getting worse, WHO announced COVID-19 as a pandemic on March 2020. Another important event is the FDA approval of the first vaccine, Pfizer, for emergency use on November 2020. Until now, active cases for this disease reached 171.67 million, with total fatality of 3.69 million. For its beginning, several variants, next please, of SARS-CoV-2 has been detected. Recently, this month, WHO announced the new nomenclature for each variant of concern and variant of interest with Greek alphabet, as you can see in this table. Let's see, for example, the first one, United Kingdom. This variant known as a B117. But after the announcement of nomenclature by WHO, now we can name this variant as an alpha. Variant of interest means the virus has mutation with established or suspect phenotypic implication and has been identified to cause community transmission while variant of concern meet the definition of variant of interest and absorb to be increased in transmissibility and virulence, causing decrease in effectiveness of this measure. This level do not replace existing scientific name. For example, those assigned by next strain, Pango, and Giset. And this nomenclature used to reduce stigma and discrimination toward the place where the variant are detected, because people often call variant by country name. For example, Indian strain and UK strain. Next slide, please. Last year, when the pandemic announced, the active case start increase and the economy was hit. We start seeking way on how to stop this catastrophic incident. The global effort to design vaccine was start, and vaccine was labeled as the new hope for everyone. As if when we get this vaccine, the world the world will be back to normal. And thanks to the scientists worldwide, the first vaccine discovered, followed by another vaccine with different type or different platform. Pfizer was approved by FDA in November 2020 for emergency use. After that, Pfizer was administered to one of the UK citizens on December 2020. Until now, you can see on the graph, next slide, please. The share of population that is fully vaccinated against COVID-19 on several countries. There are less than 5% of Indonesian citizens have been fully vaccinated, and this number is quite the average of countries in Southeast Asia, excluding Singapore. The vaccination is still on progress right now. Let us see one again about this graph. This is the country that belong to Southeast Asian country. This is Indonesia, Malaysia, Thai, Philippines, and Vietnam. Let's have a look to this one. This is less than 5% of the citizen or population. But let's see to these three countries, say like Singapore. Singapore have already reached to 30%. And the same like United Kingdom and United States has already reached up to 40%. Next slide, please. In Indonesia, approximately 70 million people have received the first dose of COVID-19 vaccine, and 11 million have completed the dose. On average, there are 10% per people, far behind the world average, that is 26 per 100 people. Indonesia's vaccine was sourced under COVAX facility that include AstraZeneca, Sinopharm, Sinovac, Moderna, Pfizer, and Novavax in its portfolio. Until now, only AstraZeneca, Sinopharm, Sinovac have been used for vaccination. Additionally, Indonesia will use PT Bio Farm vaccine later after the pulmon. Next slide, please. So the main question is, are we safe now that the vaccination has been started? I'm afraid that I have to say that the answer is not yet. Next slide, please. First, we saw many cluster cases from various social events in Indonesia. And we take a look on the headline on the slide. Most of the cases are related to teacher, lecturer, religious leaders that was prioritized in the vaccination. Our culture to celebrate everything and put high value of social gathering is one of the reasons for this cluster. Next slide, please. And second, we saw many cases of reinfection, not only in Indonesia, but across the globe. This becomes the issue when the vaccination is targeted to reach the so-called herd immunity. As you know, herd immunity is a promise to be formed once enough share of population have developed antibody for this disease. But until now, we cannot predict the exact percentage of people due to our limited knowledge of this virus. This is because most people who are infected with COVID-19 develop an immune response within the first few weeks, but we do not know how strong or lasting the immune response is, or how it different from different people. Until we understand better, it will not be possible to know how much of a population is immune and how long the immune lasts for. Next, please. The next wave might be worse, as social awareness reduced within the society. We saw this phenomena in our country. On our holiday last month, people were seen to violate the physical distancing rule on a public place. And as a result, we saw the crowd as shown in the picture. Let's see this one. This is holiday in Idul Fitri in Pangandaran. And this one was the situation before Idul Fitri, that so many people went to the traditional market. On the right side, we can see similar situation. The crowd was seen on the Ganga River, India. And not long after that, we see on the news that India has been hit by COVID-19 tsunami, resulted in many fatalities. Next slide, please. To reduce the risk for next COVID-19 wave, we must first acknowledge the obstacle that we must fight in this war. The first is COVID test inaccessibility. Most patients do not develop symptoms and left untested. Then we have another problem on tracing and monitoring. And as a number of cases increase, we can keep tracking the variant of each patient due to limited source that we have. Another big obstacle is the economic impact that result in government loosen the rules in order to keep the economy well moving. Then law of self-consciousness is also remain as a problem in this country. Next slide, please. To stop this pandemic, no single approach is effective by its own. The Swiss respiratory pandemic defense recognized that no single intervention is perfect at preventing the spread of this coronavirus, as each layer has holes. The personal and shared responsibility must be done concurrently. Even the most effective vaccination cannot solve this pandemic by itself. It must be accompanied by another measure, such as distancing, test and trace measure, quarantine, etc. Next slide, please. So, what can we do? There are 4 aspects that we can put our interest on, such as personal protective. This is related to hand hygiene, face mask, travel related, travel advice, travel restriction, border closure, and others. Physical distancing and environmental measure. Doing this measure will fasten the effort to stop the transmission of this disease and giving back our normal life. Lastly, I will share with you that the change will start within us, and our act will decide whether this pandemic will, whether this pandemic will be in quickly or not. I think that's all my presentation. Thank you so much. Let's listen to the presentation we have been waiting for from Dr. Dainis. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you for our first speaker, Professor Usman Sumo Tambunan, for the great and detailed explanation. It's such an impressive presentation. And now we will move to our second speaker. However, before of that, I remind you all, if you have any question during the presentation, please type them into bit.ly/Q&A public lecture 2021. Because we will have Q&A session right after the presentation from our second speaker. All right, right now I will introduce our second speaker, Dr. Dainis. Dr. Dainis is a freelance science communicator and a video producer with 8 years of experience producing digital educational content for the web. Her background includes a PhD in genetics from Stanford University, and she was honored to be a 2019 Jackson Wild Media Lab Fellow. Her long-running YouTube channel, brings biology and genetics to over 40,000 subscribers, and her science communication efforts have reached millions of viewers across multiple social media platforms. Now, based in Los Angeles, California, her focus is on bringing humanity and storytelling to science via online media. Recent projects include writing, hosting, and filming Untold, a 10-episode YouTube learning series produced by the American Chemical Society and PBS Digital Studios. Additionally, she recently created, wrote, hosted, and co-produced a pilot for Red Bull Media House called Nature Limits, which challenged world-class athletes to learn from the animal kingdom-owned most impressive athletes. She is constantly looking for new avenues to bring scientific stories to the public to both engage and educate. So without any further ado, please welcome to our second speaker, Dr. Alex Dainis. The time is yours.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I want to, of course, say thank you as well for inviting me to the entire organizing committee, to Dr. Usman, who just gave a fantastic talk and a wonderful summary of sort of where we are, and truly to all of you as well for being here today. I really appreciate you giving me the chance to speak, and I hope that what I present can be of some value. So I wanted to start a little bit first and just tell you a bit about my background and how that informs my perspective on COVID-19. So my training in graduate school was as a geneticist. I worked in human genetics and precision medicine. And as was so wonderfully mentioned, I do have some scientific papers that I have published, but the paper that I'm actually most proud of is the one that this illustration comes from, which was a scientific review of precision medicine for cardiologists, because it was a chance for me to summarize a field and present it to people in the hopes that they would take that information and use it in their everyday lives. And so that is what I try and do now every day with the work that I do, is I try and present information to people in the hopes that it can help them in some way. And so I hope that I can do that as well for you today. So I have a few things that I'd like to go over today, again, as we talk about COVID-19 vaccines and viral variants. I'm going to give a brief background on the disease and the virus itself, and I want to talk about how that actually impacts how the virus can mutate and how that can cause variants to arise. I want to give a brief overview of some of the vaccines that are out there today, and then how those variants that have appeared may impact vaccine efficacy and how they might impact the length of this pandemic. I do want to talk a little bit about where we can go from here and what we can do, all of us together, to fight COVID-19 and to also fight some misinformation, because that is what I spend most of my time doing, is talking about information and misinformation. And there are things that we can all do to try and help stop this pandemic when thinking about that. So as our professor just wonderfully talked about, COVID-19 has touched almost every corner of the world. There is almost no one who hasn't been touched by COVID-19 in this pandemic, but unfortunately it has hit many places harder than others. This is a disease that does not know borders, that has touched almost every country in the world. And until we are all safe, none of us are safe. We need everyone to be healthy for all of us to be healthy. And so if we look at sort of COVID-19's impact on the entire world, as was just mentioned, it has killed about 3.7 million people so far over the past year and 3 months, which is just a horrific amount of people to have lost. And as you can sort of see in this graph, there have been sort of these spikes and these lulls going up. And so while there are some places, you know, right now locally for me, our incident rate is rather low. However, in India, we've just seen this gigantic spike. And so that's why we sort of get these sort of ebbs and flows of the disease, is that we need to be able to stop it everywhere so that we can actually sort of help everyone. And of course, as we, I think, are well aware of at the moment, COVID-19 can infect almost anyone, but it impacts older generations and people with immune system issues or who are immunocompromised far worse than it does sort of young and healthy people. And so again, it's a reason why we need to make sure that we are all trying to do our best, even if we feel like we personally may not be so affected by COVID-19, keep those of us around us in our communities, in our families, and in our social groups safe, because it is so easy to transmit COVID-19 to other people that we need to make sure we're doing the best things that we can do to protect not just ourselves, but also the many vulnerable people in our communities and in our populations. And again, of course, we may all know many of the symptoms of COVID-19, that it is a respiratory virus and disease, which causes things like coughing, shortness of breath, and difficulty breathing. However, it can also become worse for people who, again, are older or who have, somebody is drawing, or who may have some immune difficulties. Then it can go on to cause hospitalization or death. So again, we now know that SARS-CoV-2 is mostly transmitted by exposure to infectious respiratory fluids. And so this is the wording directly from the CDC, that exposure can occur in 3 main ways. So the first, of course, is inhalation. So you can inhale fine respiratory droplets and aerosol particles from somebody near you if they are coughing or breathing those particles out into the air. Those particles can also be deposited on mucous membranes. So if somebody coughs or sneezes on your face, you can catch COVID-19. And again, you can also touch a surface that has COVID-19 on it and then touch one of your own mucous membranes and then transfer the virus that way. So these are a number of different ways that the virus can be transmitted. And so the best things that we can do to try and stop transmission of that disease are to avoid the 3 C's. And so again, as Professor Usman was just mentioning, the first, of course, is crowded places. If you have a smaller density of people in an area, it's less likely that any of those people will be infected by COVID-19. And so you can reduce the possibility that you may also be infected. Again, close contact settings are a place where COVID-19 can spread. So it is far more likely that you could catch COVID-19 in a small confined space with other people than you could at an outdoor gathering. And again, confined and enclosed spaces. So we want to be doing everything that we can to try and restrict the ability of that virus to jump from person to person through these airborne particles and through these droplets. So I want to talk a bit about the virus itself, because I think that, you know, it is something that for so much of the past year has felt like this invisible but massive force in many of our lives, that going out into the world, we don't know if the people around us are infected by COVID-19. It's too small to see ourselves, and yet it's having a gigantic impact on our lives. But it is something that we can see. And these pictures are really powerful to me. These are microscope pictures of the virus. On the left, you can see some individual viral particles, and you can see the spike proteins around the edges. That spike around the edge is reminiscent of a crown. That's where these coronaviruses get their name. And on the right, you can see in blue cells that are infected with COVID-19. And then in yellow, you can see the viral particles. And for me, there's something really powerful about being able to actually see this virus and know what it is that we are fighting, know what it is that we are up against, because it has felt like such an unseen force in all of our lives for the past year. But I do want to talk a bit about the actual structure of COVID-19. So as I mentioned, we have that viral particle, but viruses typically have 2 main parts. They have some type of nucleic acid genome, so DNA or RNA, and then around that they have some kind of shell. So in COVID-19, the virus that causes it, SARS-CoV-2, is an RNA virus. And so the genome is stored in RNA, and then around it you have sort of a lipid you have nucleocapsid proteins that protect that RNA, and then around it you have sort of a lipid fatty envelope, and you have those spikes that poke out of the envelope. And those spikes are what we're going to be talking about a lot today, because they're a main target of the vaccines, and they're one of the things that we're keeping an eye on when we're looking at variants that are spreading through the population, because those spikes stud the outside of the virus, and they're what bind to the ACE2 receptors on our cell to actually allow the virus into our cells to replicate. Because the virus, of course, cannot replicate on its own out in the world. A virus needs to infect a host before it can replicate. And so I don't want to go through all of the details of this process here, but just to say that that virus binding to that ACE2 receptor allows it into your cells. From there, it can hijack your cell's own machinery to make more copies of that virus and then go out and infect more cells. And of course, SARS-CoV-2 is called CoV-2 because it is the second of this type of virus. So the first that was seen was SARS-CoV. This was severe acute respiratory syndrome, which was seen in Asia in 2002. And at the time, this was, and of course, was a very large deal. There were about 8,000 people who were ill and about 774 deaths. The possible mode of transmission of that virus, they believed that, and they've tracked down to the fact that the viral reservoir was in bats, which is where many different coronaviruses and viruses in general will replicate and will mutate. That spread to civets, and then from there it spread to humans. And of course, at the time, this was very scary for many of us around the world, but resulted in 774 deaths, which again is a horrible and tragic thing. But now thinking about SARS-CoV-2, which has killed almost 3.75 million people, it is terrifying to think of how that small virus was so scary, and now this one is even scarier. There was also a predecessor coronavirus called MERS. So this was Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. This was about a decade later in the Middle East, and there were then 866 deaths. And again, they believe that this coronavirus originally started mutating in bats and then moved to dromedary camels and then moved on to humans. And again, about a decade later, now we've seen SARS-CoV-2, which has caused the COVID-19 pandemic. So I want to talk a little bit about the genome of SARS-CoV-2. That RNA genome is about 30,000 base pairs long, 30,000 nucleotides long. And while this is a sizable number of nucleotides compared to our own 3.2 billion nucleotide long genome, it's quite small. And it's broken up into a couple of sections. So there's a section called ORF1AB, which is involved in the replication machinery. This is how the cell, or how the virus makes more viral RNA when it infects one of your cells. There's then a short portion that encodes for the spike protein, which again is very important for what we're going to be talking about today. And then you have a number of other regions of the genome that are important in building the rest of the proteins that that virus needs to actually go and replicate and create new infections. Now, the polymerase that actually does the job of copying the RNA to make new copies of the genome is relatively error prone. So it will create small genetic mutations and small genetic typos as replication happens. So this is something that we're well aware of, that we know happens in many viruses. And these mutations could happen at any point in the genome. So they could happen in a region where they don't have a very large effect at all. They could happen in a region where they have just a small effect on something like the transmission or the severity of disease that comes from that version of the virus. Or they could have a very large effect where they could change something large structurally, which could either render the virus inactive or could make it potentially a worse and more dangerous virus. And again, these are things that, when we think about these variants happening, some of these variants may not have any sort of big effect, but some of them could really increase how quickly the virus can spread or how severe it can be when it infects someone. The other issue with these is that they could potentially affect vaccine efficacy. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that could happen in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about the fact that we're able to actually look at these viral variants and identify them due to genome sequencing. So many of the tests that are used currently to diagnose SARS-CoV-2 are something like an antibody test or a PCR test, which really just give you a yes or no answer of whether or not the virus is present in a person. However, by doing viral sequencing, where we actually use RNA sequencing to look at the entire sequence of the genome, we can look for when these small typos or mutations happen, and from there we can actually track them. So what we're looking at here in this slide is a lineage map of different SARS-CoV-2 viral genomes as they've spread across the world. So we're actually looking at time here. So on the left, we're looking at sort of December of 2019. And then all the way on the right, we have June of 2021. So today, I think I pulled this 2 days ago, so it's pretty up to date. And it's as if you're looking at a family tree, but tilted on its side, where the ancestral virus is on the left, and all of those different small mutations create a different lineage over to the right. And you can see now that we have many different lineages that, as was mentioned earlier, are now labeled things like alpha, beta, gamma, and delta that are popping up in different regions. So we can look as well at how those different variants are affecting different populations and how high the incidence of those variants is in different regions. So here they're all color-coded and they're very small, but this is again looking at that entire data set over the course of the pandemic to see which viral variants have been seen more often in one region than another. But I've actually decided to look just at this year. So just looking at January 1st to now, and I pulled this data today, you can see that actually that Delta variant, which we're going to talk a little bit in green, is starting to pop up more and more in different places. So it's here in the United States. It's a large portion of the sequenced genomes that we can see right now in India, and it is also popping up in Indonesia. Now, this does not necessarily reflect the actual incidence of these variants in these regions, because we're not sequencing every single person. So one of the things that we need to think about moving forward in this pandemic is how we can get this genome sequencing to more places and to more people, because we want to be able to accurately track those variants, but we're not doing it in many places, especially in the United States. I know we're not doing it very well because we're not sequencing as many genomes as we should be. So one of the things that I think is going to be important is continued tracking of these viral variants by making genome sequencing of these viruses easier and more accessible to more people and more places. Now, we're going to be talking a bit about mutations that affect the spike protein. And the reason why this is important is because that spike protein is the key that will open that door into your cells by binding to the ACE2 receptor. So if you have a mutation on the top of, or on any portion of this spike protein, it could affect how that spike protein binds to the receptor and how it gets into your cell. It could also affect whether or not your body actually recognizes it with antibodies. So here I have a little drawing of the spike protein. And when you either get a vaccine or you get infected with SARS-CoV-2 itself, your body will create an immune response that will recognize that spike protein. So you may have antibodies that bind to certain regions on that spike protein. However, if you have viral variants that pop up that could change the surface of that spike protein and change what it looks like, some of them could actually impact that structure. And if they happen in a place where you have created antibodies against, they could actually decrease the number of antibodies that bind to that spike protein, or the different types of antibodies that bind to that spike protein, and could reduce the vaccine efficacy. So changes to that shape of the spike protein and changes to the amino acids that build it up could deplete your immune response from the vaccine. And as again was mentioned before, there are a number of different variants that are circulating in the world right now. They have been renamed, and I think the point was made wonderfully that it's important that we have these names now that are both easy to pronounce and remember, unlike B117 and B1351, and also do not assign a place name to the origin of the disease, because we clearly this virus knows no borders. It is not staying in just one place, and we want to decrease the sort of shame or the potential to not want to look for these variants and not report these variants by having a place name associated with them. I know that if there was a variant called Alex's house, I would probably not want that variant to be out there in the world. And so we want to make sure that we're not assigning any sort of responsibility to a location for finding and reporting these variants. So these new names from the Greek letters are much easier. But again, as was mentioned, they do not erase any of the scientific data that comes with it, like the mutations or where it was originally found. All of that scientific data is still preserved. So we have a number of variants of concern that, again, could gain this label because they increase the transmissibility of the virus itself. They could change the virulence of the virus, or they could cause a decrease in public health measures, including the vaccine. There are also, again, variants of interest. So these do not meet the prior criteria, but they could cause higher community transmission of COVID-19 or otherwise have some sort of issue associated with them that means we want to keep track of them. So we have 4 variants of concern that the WHO is currently tracking, and now 6 more of these variants of interest that we're looking at. Now, one of the best ways that we can fight these variants are actually the vaccines that we have out there right now. And I want to talk a little bit about the different vaccines that are present out there in the world and how they work. So the main way that a vaccine works is that it gives your immune system an advanced warning of what it should look out for in the future. And it does this by presenting your body with some small piece of a pathogen, be that a virus or a bacteria, and showing your body what it is that it needs to respond to without actually causing a disease. So without the fear that you're going to actually get sick from that virus. So this can work in a number of different ways, but the idea is that you give somebody a portion of the virus, be that a small protein or perhaps a weakened or inactivated virus. They will develop an immune response against it in a safe method so that they don't have to actually get the disease itself. And then the immune response will remember what that viral protein or what that viral particle looked like for the future so that your body can fight it if you ever do get infected with SARS-CoV-2. And again, one of the important things about vaccination is that it helps not just you, but also everyone in your community through herd immunity. So if nobody in, this is going very fast, I apologize, but if nobody in your community is vaccinated and you get the virus, you could spread it to people in your community quite easily. But as the number of vaccinated people in a region goes up, it's possible that you can actually control the spread of that virus. So not only is the vaccine helping you, but as the number of people in a community goes up, you're decreasing the chance that it will find anybody to be able to spread to. And the more that we can stop that spread, the more that we can actually stop that viral variant, or the spread of viral variants. Because as I mentioned, the mutations happen as that virus is replicating. It happens as that RNA is being copied in the cell. So if we can stop if we can stop people from getting infected, we can stop the virus's ability to actually have these mutations and become a variant. So there are a number of different vaccines against SARS-CoV-2 out there in the world right now. I'm going to be talking about 3 ones today that have been sort of really in the news and have been starting to be spread across the world, but many of them work by focusing on the spike protein of the virus. So showing your body just the spike protein in isolation and allowing your body to create an immune response against it without actually getting infected. There are, though, and I'm going to talk about as well, inactivated vaccines against the virus that are being used. And this is where you can actually replicate the virus in a lab and then chemically inactivate it so that it cannot actually replicate in you and it can't infect you and use your cells to make more of it, but your body can still see what those proteins look like and create an immune response against it. So RNA vaccines are one of the most effective vaccines against SARS-CoV-2 that we have out there in the world right now. And these are really an ingenious method of using genetics to fight a virus and to create a vaccine. So they work by encapsulating a small piece of RNA that codes for just that spike protein in a lipid nanoparticle, and then injecting that into your arm. The lipid nanoparticle keeps that piece of RNA safe until it gets into your cell, where it can be used by your cell to create a version of the spike protein. Your cell will then display that spike protein to your immune system so you can create antibodies against it. These vaccines have been shown to be incredibly effective. So the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are both around 95% effective against the original strain of the coronavirus. They've also been shown to be incredibly safe. There have been low rates of adverse events against especially these RNA vaccines. So they're safe and effective, and they're one of our best tools against fighting the coronavirus. However, they do have some drawbacks in that they take 2 injections to be fully effective, and they have to be kept in low cold temperatures. So this can be a problem for actually distributing them to many places because you need somewhere that has a very specialized freezer, and you have to ensure that you can see the same patient twice in a row to make sure that they get both doses of the vaccine. There are also a number of vaccines out there right now that are viral vector vaccines. These use a different virus, so an adenovirus, which is a typical cold virus. These adenoviruses have been modified so that they are safe and they cannot replicate within you, but they can be used to deliver a DNA message into your cells. And again, this is a DNA message that will tell your cells just how to make the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2 so that your body can learn to make an immune response against it. The AstraZeneca vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine are two examples of these viral vector vaccines. In fact, I received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. They have been shown to be a little less effective than the Pfizer vaccines. However, it's unfair to make direct comparisons in their symptomatic case efficacies because the clinical trials were run at different times in different populations. However, like the RNA vaccines, these viral vector vaccines have been shown to be incredibly effective at preventing severe disease and hospitalization and death. So they're still very effective vaccines. They have had some small severe side effects that have popped up now that they've been delivered to more people. At a rate of about 7 in a million people, we're seeing some severe adverse effects like blood clots. However, for most populations, getting the vaccine is still far safer and far much lower risk than actually getting the disease itself. And so many places are still recommending the use of these vaccines. The third vaccine that I want to talk about today are inactivated viral vaccines, like the Sinovac vaccine and the Coronavac vaccine. And these are, again, where you replicate the vaccine in a lab and then deactivate it. So your cells, so we have an antigen presenting cell here, they can take up that entire inactivated virus, break it into parts and show those parts to your immune system. So you can actually create antibodies to things beyond just the spike protein. And these are often able to be stored at much lower temperatures. These have been shown to be effective against the virus, and there are continuing trials and continuing now population studies going on that these are as well an effective way to try and fight the virus. However, viral variants, as I mentioned before, could affect vaccine efficacy. And there are a number of different studies out there right now looking into this. And the number one thing that I want to say is that at the moment, the vaccines that many different places are using still seem to look like they have good protection against these viral variants. It may not be the same as the original sort of wild type strain of the virus, but many of the vaccines that we're using right now do provide good protection against these variants for the moment. So the best thing that we can all do is to get the vaccines that we currently have if they are accessible to us. Not everybody has access to the vaccines at the moment, but if you have an opportunity to get a vaccine, it is still best to get the vaccines that we're using right now because they do have some efficacy against these variants. It is possible that we may need booster vaccines in the future that are specialized to certain variants if we find a point where the vaccines are no longer effective. But I did find this sort of wonderful graphic summarizing a number of different studies from an MD PhD on Twitter, Dr. Tidanji. And so she has summarized some of the latest studies looking into how a number of the different vaccines actually work against these viral variants. So here she's pointed out 4 of the different viral variants. These are the variants of concern: alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. And as you can see up at the top here, she's showing that all 4 of these do see some increase in transmissibility in the population, specifically alpha and delta. Delta being, so far has been seen to be far more transmissible than many of the other variants and the original virus itself. Alpha and delta also do increase severity of death and hospitalization in different populations. And so they're a little worrisome in that they're both easier to spread and they might be more severe if you actually catch them. However, down at the bottom, she has wonderfully summarized a number of different vaccines. So Sinovac, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Novavax, and Pfizer, and looking at how well they can actually help people avoid disease from these different 4 variants. So what you can see is that looking at Pfizer is actually some of the most promising data here, which is good, that Pfizer still shows good efficacy against the alpha, beta, and delta variant measured in different ways. If you look at things like AstraZeneca, it does show a rather decreased efficacy down to about 10%. But again, all of this data is collected in slightly different ways. Some of it is population studies and some of it is antibody studies in the lab. And I do want to dive into a couple of these studies. But again, the point that I really want to make here is that the vaccines that we have right now do have an efficacy against these viral variants. And so getting the vaccines that are currently available is still the best way to try and stop them from spreading and stop them from mutating further. So this is a study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. It was looking at vaccine efficacy of the Pfizer vaccine against the B117 and B1351 variants. And so here you can see those are the alpha variants and the beta variants, now renamed. And so what they did is they actually looked at people who were infected and had a PCR confirmed infection with these 2 different variants after 1 dose and then after 14 days of the second dose, and then looked at how well the vaccine protected them versus someone who did not actually get the vaccine. And so again, as a reminder, against the original version of this virus, this vaccine was about 95% effective. And now looking at the alpha variant and the beta variant, we can see here that it's about 89% effective and about 75% effective. So the variant does reduce the efficacy of the vaccine. However, it is still effective. If we had seen, we've been a bit spoiled by how good our vaccines currently work. If we had been shown last year, about a year ago, a vaccine that worked with something like a 75% efficacy, I think we all would have been overjoyed and really excited that we had something that was so efficacious. So it is still a good sign that these vaccines show 75 and 80% efficacy of any confirmed infection. But if you will notice these boxes a little further down, when we look at the efficacy against severe, critical, or fatal disease, they are still extremely efficacious at about 100%. This was a small study, so that number might be a little high. But again, this vaccine is very good against the variants. There was also a laboratory-based study against the Delta variant that was looking at neutralizing antibodies. Excuse me. So they took serum from somebody who had the vaccine, and in the lab, they looked at how good this was at neutralizing proteins and virus, both the wild type virus and the virus that had this Delta variant. And they found that the neutralizing antibodies against the Delta variant were reduced. However, the vaccines did still provide, not some infection, they provided some protection. That is a typo in the slide. So they did still provide some protection. And they also found that 2 doses of the vaccine were, again, better than just 1 single dose. So there are some people out there who have gotten their first dose of the vaccine and are worried to get the second dose. And again, if it is available to you, I would absolutely recommend getting the second dose, because especially as these variants start to spread around in the population, the better protected we can be, the faster we can stop the spread. They also found in this study that the neutralizing antibody titer was reduced with age and over time. So the older the people were and the longer it had been since they got the vaccine, the lower that their the lower that their percentage of antibodies was. And so it is possible that in the future, we may need booster vaccines, not just because the viral variants change, but also because original vaccine efficacy could decrease over time. However, they were still effective. And so that point might be 2, 3, or 4 years out into the future. We just don't know yet. And again, the best thing to do is to get the vaccine that's available to you now. Similarly, Novavax versus the beta variant did show about 51% efficacy in a study. And Moderna is in fact testing a variant-specific booster at the moment that is designed against one of these boosters, with the idea that in the future, we may actually need updated vaccines that will allow your body to recognize a new variant version of the spike protein so that you can create an updated immune response against that, and again, lower your risk of getting disease. Now, they were looking at this in some of the variants that are out there right now. And again, our current vaccines are pretty good at tackling those variants. But they did show that by just slightly tweaking the code of that RNA vaccine and making it look like one of these spike proteins instead of the original spike protein, they did see an increase in the immune response against or in the protection against these variants. So it is possible that in the future, we could quickly make new vaccines against these variants using something like an RNA technology, because it's much faster to produce than some of the older technologies that we've used in the past. So it is possible that we could quickly and effectively create new vaccines against these variants moving forward. And again, we're getting more and more data about this every day. This is a paper that I pulled really just because it was published 3 days ago, I guess, on June 9th, looking at the efficacy of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine against a couple of these different SARS-CoV-2 variants. And again, it showed that they did provide some protection against these variants. So every day we're getting more data about these vaccines and about these variants. And that is one of the things that I think about a lot, is that typically when we think about science, as scientists, we communicate at the very end of a study after years and years of study. And now we're communicating in the moment as we're doing these studies, as we're creating these vaccines, as we're going forward. We are trying to communicate that to the public quite quickly. And it's just encouraging and inspiring as someone who's not directly working on these vaccines to see how quickly these scientists are both doing the work and also getting that information out there into the world. But of course, these variants are still spreading. These were, again, a couple of news articles just from the past couple of days that Delta variant that has risen to such prominence in India and has caused such devastation there is now quickly spreading around the world. And so we still need to be quite careful and quite cautious, even though I think some of us in places that do have access to the vaccine have started to think that, well, now that the vaccine is out here, we must be towards the end. We must be able to resume normal life. But we do still need to be quite cautious because these variants are spreading and they could be more transmissible and more severe. This paper was a wonderful sort of article in the New England Journal of Medicine from Dr. Newsel, who was talking about how these potential variants could cause the end of the pandemic to be a bit farther away than we think. And I pulled these two quotes, and I think they're very indicative of her paper and very important. That SARS-CoV-2 will continue to replicate in humans, mutations will continue to occur, and variants of concern will continue to emerge. From a public health perspective, limiting viral transmission through widespread use of vaccines, masking, social distancing, and other control measures will reduce new viral mutations. The emergence of variant strains is arguably the greatest threat to control of the COVID-19 pandemic, and a coordinated global prevention and control plan is the only way forward. So where do we go from here? So again, as was mentioned before, none of this is happening in a vacuum, and the virus does not know borders. So looking at some place like Indonesia, you can see that, as with many places in the world, there was a very large spike at the beginning of this year, sort of in the December to January area. And now there is another small spike happening. And we can see this as well at sort of the world population, that if we look at coronavirus cases across the world, we saw this big spike around the new year. And there was another spike again, sort of in May, as we're seeing these new variants pop up. We would love to see this be a sharp downward slope towards the end of this, but we're not quite there yet. However, again, as was mentioned, vaccines are starting to roll out, vaccinations are starting to rise, and nearly 20 million people in Indonesia have been vaccinated. And around the world, we've hit 2.25 billion doses of the vaccine that are out there. However, this still is not enough. We need to get more people vaccinated because we really need to stop the spread of these variants. It is possible that these variants could evade vaccine efficacy, and until we stop the spread of it by getting as many people as possible vaccinated and continuing to use social and public health control measures like masking, social distancing, hand washing, and general sort of hygiene and sanitation as appropriate, we're not going to get this pandemic under control. The other thing that I do want to very briefly touch on is the fact that information and misinformation have been huge sort of driving factors in this pandemic, that, as I had just talked about, scientists are trying to communicate what we know as it's happening and as we're learning it. And there has been a rise of misinformation across the world that has caused vaccine hesitancy and has caused people to doubt the sort of reality of COVID-19 and the pandemic that we're all dealing with. One of the reasons for this is that scary and false misinformation travels much faster than true information on the internet. And this was a study taken even before the pandemic that found that fake news traveled farther and faster than true news on social media platforms like Twitter. False news stories inspired fear, disgust, and surprise, while true stories inspired anticipation, sadness, joy, and trust. And those sad and scary and fearful stories just travel so much faster. And so that, combined with the fact that we all of us have confirmation bias, where the overlap between the facts in the world and our personal beliefs, we tend to overvalue things that already align with our personal beliefs, and we tend to undervalue things that don't. So if we see a story that reinforces a belief that we have, whether or not the facts are there, we're going to put more stock and more trust in that story. So both of these things combined have really caused misinformation to spread across this pandemic. And so that's one of the things that I think, along with social distancing and vaccination and all kinds of public health measures, one of the things that we can actually do, all of us, to stop this pandemic is to try and stop misinformation as well. So of all of the information that we see out there in the world, we need to be remembering that it's trying to use our emotions to spread, and to think about our own confirmation bias, and then to analyze each piece of data that we're sharing, and to think about things like where that information is coming from, what data it's actually presenting, what facts are supporting it, and whether or not the person who is sharing that information could have some kind of ulterior motive or some other reason why they're sharing this information. And so if we can all ask this of ourselves and attend platforms like this that, again, the organizers have wonderfully put together to share good, solid information, we can try and stop the misinformation that is causing this pandemic to spread. So over the course of this talk, I've talked about a number of things, and I feel like I have left out so much because there is so much information around this pandemic and around this disease that it's hard to put it all into a talk. But I hope that I've shared some information with you about viral variants and vaccines and how these viral variants could impact the efficacy of our vaccines. And as I thought about how to end this presentation, I really did want to end on the fact that these vaccines don't know any borders, and they're spreading around the world. And for all of us to be healthy, for any of us to be healthy, all of us have to be healthy. And so I do think, though, that there is some slight silver lining that we can see here, that many people are coming together. Many people are coming together to spread information, to make these vaccines work. The effort of these vaccines was a worldwide collaboration between many scientists from many governments and companies all coming together and working on the same problem to try and tackle the same problem all at once. And so, and similarly, I'm able to talk with you from halfway around the world and be able to share information. And so I hope that that spirit of collaboration is something that we can take with us forward. So again, I want to thank the entire organizing committee for having me. I'm truly honored and humbled that you asked me to talk and to share some information with you. Again, to Professor Usman for his wonderful talk, and to the moderator for your moderation. I really appreciate everyone joining us today, as well all of the participants for coming and listening. And so with that, I will end my presentation. So thank you all for listening.
Yeah, all right. Thank you for Dr. Alex Dainis for your great and detailed explanation. Wow, we gained so many new knowledge and information. And just a reminder to all of the participants that you have not allowed to write anything to the screen. So yeah, I will summary of presentation from our two speakers. First, from Professor Usman presentation, we all know that most people who are infected with COVID-19 develop an immune response within the first few weeks, but we don't know how strong or lasting that immune response is, or how it differs for different people. However, we can enhance some of measures to reduce spreading of COVID-19, which are personal protective, travel-related, physical distance, and environmental measure. And also, For our second speaker, Dr. Dainis, we already know that about SARS-CoV-2 mutation, RNA polymerase is error prone, so mutation happen. Mutation could happen at any point in the genome. They could have no effect, a small effect, and also a large effect. Some could change viral transmissibility or severity, and also SARS-CoV-2 mutation can affect vaccine efficacy because some mutation may change the structure of the spike and reduce the ability of antibody. And my favorite sentence from Dr. Dainis' presentation is SARS-CoV-2 will continue to replicate in humans, mutations will continue to occur, and variants of concern will continue to emerge. From public health perspective, limiting viral transmission through widespread use of vaccines, masking, social distancing, and other control measures will reduce new viral mutations. All right. So now we move to another session and we will go ahead and take some time for question and answer sessions. Once again, just a reminder, if you have any question during the presentation, please type them into bit.ly/Q&A public lecture 2021. I will bring some of the most liked questions up during the presentation to our speakers. While waiting for questions from participants, first I will bring several questions that we have chosen from the registration form. There are two questions for participants for each speaker. Professor Usman Sumo Tambunan and Dr. Dainis will give a chance for each speaker to answer the question directed to them. All right, we start from two questions for Professor Usman Sumo Tambunan. So the first question is from Hadi Nugraha Cipta Dharma from University Technology Malaysia. So the question is, how is your opinion regarding body endurance of some people who have not been vaccinated against mutated COVID-19? Is there any other alternative approach that can be studied and applied by biochemists to kill COVID-19 as effective as vaccine? Is there any possibility to face various waves of COVID-19 pandemic in Indonesia? As an example, recently, Malaysia has been entered the third wave of COVID-19 pandemic that affected the lockdown policy until June 14, 20, and 21. So we will give chance to our first speaker, Professor Usman Sumo Tambunan, to answer the first question. The time is yours. So apologize, Prof. You have to first unmute your microphone before I answer the question.
Okay. In my opinion, people who have not been vaccinated should try to protect themselves with another kind of shield, such as practicing the health protocol and try to stay fit through exercise and taking supplements such as vitamin D or omega-3. For the alternative approach, beside the vaccination, of course, we are trying to find a proper antiviral candidate in hope that on the other day, we can treat this disease as easy as other disease. Besides that, biochemists can learn to enhance our body's function through nutrition or any dead source. For example, there is a study published about the effect of polyunsaturated fatty acid on DIET to reduce severity of COVID-19. Then, is there any possibility? The possibility of having another wave is still there, no matter how safe we feel currently. But I personally think the chance is quite low according to the data of Indonesian condition. The anticipation that we have and participation from the influencer and the student to raise awareness of this disease, the same like our activity of today. That's the answer for the first one. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Professor Usman, for answering the first question. Now we move to the next question, the question number 2 from Albertus Aldo from Universitas Indonesia. He asks, as a biochemist, the phenomenon of mutation in the protein structure of viruses has attracted the attention of various parties because mutation is the genome that leads to protein changes are only discussed as a natural phenomenon, which cannot be approached probabilistically, let alone deterministically. To what extent has biochemistry provided a mechanism for predicting mutation? Do you think that technological advances such as AI and machine learning can help predict where and when mutation will appear and what can be developed there?
Okay,
so the time is your, Professor.
Okay, thank you for the question. Okay, yes, you're right about the randomness, nature of virus mutation. This pandemic is also a result of this natural phenomenon. There are a great possibility that we will encounter this kind of situation in the future. Actually, the effort to predict mutation behavior of an organism has remained a challenge for scientists since years ago. Several studies have been conducted about this, and it's a big task since we have to consider the relationship between its gene, environment, etc., as the background effect for its mutation. A technology has always been a part for this effort. For example, there are so many studies about virus mutation prediction using neural network that was used to model an algorithm for artificial intelligence and machine learning model. I think if we wait a little more, we can get there soon. So that's the answer for the second question. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Usman, for your explanation. Yeah, so now we move to 2 questions from participants that were typed on registration form for Dr. Dainis. So the first question for Dr. Dainis from Veronica Oladita Siagian from Universitas Pajajaran. She asked, how fast the virus mutation happened? Is there any way we can minimize the mutation? Is it possible for any vaccine to still be effective to mutate virus? With the rate of mutation that happened, is it possible to be back to an absolute normal state without mass and social distancing? The time is yours for answer the first question for Dr. Dainis.
Thank you. This is a great question. So we are able to look at the rate of viral mutation of SARS-CoV-2. And so we know that it's mutating at a rate about half the speed of something like the flu virus. So we're already well aware that over the course of many years, the flu virus changes and it picks up mutations. And so we need to get something like a yearly flu shot booster to keep up with how the different strains are changing and which strains will be most popular or most prevalent that year. So we do know that SARS-CoV-2 is mutating, but it's mutating slower than other viruses that we deal with every day in our daily lives. So one way, of course, to stop that rate of mutation and to make it even slower is to slow the spread. So by wearing masks, by getting vaccinated, we can reduce the ability of the virus to pick up mutations and continue to change and create variants out there in the population. However, as I was just mentioning, we do know that our current vaccines do have some efficacy against mutated viruses that are out there. And I do think that with this current rate of mutation, because it's not especially fast, it is possible that we could get back to some sort of absolute normal state where the coronavirus is something that we deal with like the flu virus, where it may have some sort of seasonality. It may be worse in some years than others, but it's something that we get maybe every 2 years, every 3 years, some sort of updated booster vaccine too, and that we recognize is in our communities, but is something that we can control. I think that COVID-19 is going to become something that we live with rather than something that we completely eradicate. With how fast it's mutating, again, my personal opinion is that it will become something like the flu or like a cold virus that is around, but that we have under control. So I do think with effective vaccines, we can get it under control and we can return to normal. But to do that, we need everybody's participation in getting vaccinated when it's available to you and participating in other public health measures until then. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Dr. Alex, for your answering the first question. Now we move to the next question. The question number 2 is asked from Rosari Asti from Universitas Indonesia and M. Taufik N from Universitas Negeri Jakarta. They ask, is herd immunity a real thing? What do you think about it? Is it an effective way in order to end this pandemic? And how effective the herd immunity system if 70% to 80% of the population have gained vaccine? So the time is yours.
Thank you. Herd immunity is a real thing. I like that the CDC and the WHO sometimes refer to it as community immunity rather than herd immunity, that if the people in your community have some sort of immune response against a virus, you can slow its spread. However, the way that we should get to the only way to get to herd immunity or to community immunity is through vaccination. There were many places at the beginning of the pandemic that wanted to take a strategy of allowing people to get sick to reach herd immunity, and that is not an effective way to reach herd immunity because, as we know, you can now get viral mutations which can escape that immunity. So vaccination is really the fastest and best way to reach that herd immunity. The percentage of people that we're going to have to reach is still in question. 70 to 80% is the percentage that I have seen a number of other experts quoting. But again, because this is something that's developing and we don't really know everything about this virus yet, we don't know what that number is going to be, that we can get it under control, that we can return to some sort of truly normal life worldwide. But again, herd immunity or community immunity is an important strategy to fighting this, but the way to get there is through vaccination rather than letting people get sick. So thank you.
All right, thank you for Dr. Alex for your great and detailed explanation. And now we move to a question that we have collected from Slido by link.ly/Q&A public lecture 2021. And I will read and deliver question with most slides to each speaker until the time for Q&A session runs out. So yeah, for the most likely question, the question number 1. Dear Dr. Alex, thank you for the amazing lecture. My question is could we prepare vaccine for possible future disease?
Yes, so there are a number of research groups that are trying to create either pan-influenza or pan-coronavirus vaccines. So these are vaccines that would ideally create some sort of response in your immune system, not just to one coronavirus or to one flu virus, but to be able to recognize many different types of that virus so that it's possible that if we knew, for example, and we did have some advance warning because of things like SARS and MERS, that coronaviruses were going to be something we might need to tackle at a global scale. We could try and create these pan-coronavirus vaccines that would allow our immune systems to create an immune response to not just coronaviruses that exist now, but also coronaviruses that we could be exposed to in the future. Now, these don't exist yet. They're one of the sort of dreams of vaccine researchers to create these pan-coronavirus vaccines or pan-influenza vaccines, but it is something that people are working on to figure out how we can potentially give ourselves advanced protection. And it's not by predicting exactly what that would be, but by thinking about the types of viruses that could be problematic and that could pop up in a population and trying to create vaccines against those first. So not yet, but people are trying. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer, Dr. Alice. And the question number 2, I would like to ask Professor Usman, if there may COVID-19 mutation, does it mean that we must provide a new kind of vaccine to be able to combat this mutation? Right, the time is your professor.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. This is has already shared or explained by Dr. Alexander Dainis, but I will ask this, answer this question. Not really. We must check whether the administered vaccine can combat this mutation at first. And if the new variant cannot be prevented using the current vaccine, there is a possibility to get a vaccine booster. The booster as an adjuvant. A booster shot can be just additional dose of current vaccine or update component of the current vaccine. The same thing like Novapac. Novapac remedies has adjuvant, but others vaccine, no, they don't use adjuvant or booster for the one, but Novapac use adjuvant or booster for this vaccine. That's why the efficacy of Novapac is more than 90%. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Professor, for your answer. So we move to the next question. So this question from Professor Bakri, he asks, to Dr. Alex Dainis, do you think the coronavirus could disappear from the world? And how about the herd immunity? Has it started to grow now?
So as I mentioned before, I think that coronavirus, personally, I think that coronavirus will not disappear, but that it will become something that we live with and that we can control. And I do believe that herd immunity has started to grow. As we see increasing numbers of people getting vaccines, we are seeing in populations with high vaccination rates decreases in outbreaks. And so, in fact, one of the things that we saw here first in the United States was that as vaccination rates increased in nursing homes, so in elderly populations, the incidence of disease dropped very, very quickly as those small communities became more immune through vaccination. And so that's happening at a larger scale now in places where vaccines are becoming more prevalent. So I do think that it has started to grow, but we're not there yet. We need everybody across the world to have access to these vaccines as soon as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Alex, for your explanation. Now we move to the next question. Could you please give us advice on how to educate the people that still don't believe in the virus, that it really exists? So this question, I will give chance to Dr. Alex Dainis to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very hard question. I think that the best that we can all do is to share the information that we know is true, to share sources of information that are trusted, places like the WHO, the CDC, the FDA. And also there are a number of doctors and nurses sharing their experience of caring for patients with COVID-19. I think that that is something that is important to share with other people, that these are the doctors and nurses who are trying to take care of these people, who are trying to help them, who have to go into work every day and watch these patients truly suffer and die. And so I think amplifying their words and their messages, that is one way to try and convince people who don't believe in it. And I think, unfortunately, as time goes on, more and more people are starting to know people who have gotten COVID-19 and who have died from it. And so, unfortunately, sharing our personal experiences is one way to spread that message as well, because it is out there and it is affecting so many people. And it's unfortunate that so many of us now have those personal experiences, but I think sharing that is an important way to impress upon other people that this is a real disease that is threatening so many lives across the globe, and that we need to get it under control quickly. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Alex Dainis, for your explanation. Yeah, thank you to all of the participants also for your amazing question. Because the time for the Q&A session has run out, therefore I have to farewell, and we will move to another session. Thank you to our speakers, Professor Usman and Dr. Alex, as well as to all the participants for having me, and I will see you next time. I yield my time back to MC. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. And I want to say thank you very much for Dr. Alex Dainis and Professor Usman for your very great lecture. May all of us get the value and benefits from the lecture. Let's give our best virtual applause for our speakers today. Now, before we continue to the next agenda, I want to remind you to fill the feedback form through the link that will be given at the end of our event. The e-certificate will be sent through your email day 7 after this event. Okay, now Public Lecture 2021 wants to give an appreciation for our lecturers today, Dr. Alex Dainis and Professor Usman, and also our moderator, Mr. Hakiki. So can you move to the certificate slide, please? Okay, thank you. Okay, the first is Professor Usman Sumo friend Tambunan. For Professor Usman, thank you very much for joining us on this public lecture, and also thank you for your very exciting lecture today. So operator, can you take the photo, please?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself. Yes, yeah. Take care of yourself.
Yes, Prof.
I've done. Take the photos.
Okay. Now we move on to Dr. Alexander Dainis. For Dr. Alexander Dainis, thank you so much for joining us on this public lecture today, and also thank you for your amazing lecture. Ms. Operator, can you take the photo, please?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm truly honored to have spoken to you all, and thank you all for watching and inviting me here today.
Okay, done.
Okay, thank you. Now we move on to our moderator today, Mr. Hakiki. Okay, thank you so much for being our moderator today and leading the discussion section very well. So this discussion section can run very smoothly. Okay, now Ms. Operator, can you take the photo, please?
Okay. Dear participants, please open your camera. And if you don't have any trouble, please open up your camera and I'll wait until everyone is ready. The participants haven't opened their camera. Okay, I'll start for the first slides. There are 8 slides here. And get your biggest smile, everyone. On the count of 3, I'll take the screenshots. Get ready. 1, 2, 3. Okay, next, guys. Wait, hold on. Here. Can anyone replace me to take a screenshot because I can't see all. It's already pop up in screen. Please. Sorry, I have troubles. Anyone take screenshot, please?
Okay, thank you, operator. And maybe our staff, can you share the screen? Thank you. So now it's time for the quiz. Yes, we will give the question based on our lecture today. So if you want to answer the question, please raise your hand with the raise hand feature on Zoom. And please, I will call your name and then please open your camera and microphone to answer the question. If your answer is right, our committee will contact you via Zoom chat. So guys, are you ready? Yes, of course you are. Let's begin with the first question. The first question is, how do coronaviruses change and mutate? I will repeat the question once again. How do coronaviruses change and mutate? If some of you know the answer and want to answer the question, please raise your hand. Okay, the first lucky participant is Alia Maharani. Okay, Alia Maharani, are you there? Can you open your microphone and camera, please?
I'm sorry, I cannot turn on my video camera because of the signal problems.
Yes.
So, from what I get from the lecture, the coronavirus mutate by when they have that outer layer that is prone to errors when they are replicating, and so the mutation happens when the error happened and changed the RNA in the virus. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alia Maharani, for the answer. So now I will move to Dr. Alex. Dr. Alex, are you there?
I am.
Yes. So how about Alia answer? Is it right?
I think Alia's answer was great. So she was correct that as mutations happen in the RNA, that can affect the outside of the virus as well. It can create the protein. So yes.
Okay, congratulations, Alia, for the answer, and thank you so much for your participation. And also thank you, Dr. Alex Dennis, for the explanation. And for Alia, our committee will contact you soon. So the second question will be taken by Alia Salma.
Okay, now we move on to the second question. So the second question is, how can we slow the spread of viral variants? I will repeat once again. How can we slow the spread of viral variants? Okay, if you want to answer the question, you can raise your hand for now. I want to remind you again, if you want to answer, you can raise your hand. So the question is, if you forget, is how can we slow the spread of viral variants? Is there anyone who wants to answer the question? Okay, I think our participant cannot answer this. So Dr. Alex, do you want to answer the question?
Alia, I'm so sorry, but there is a participant that raised his or her hand.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I don't see that.
Yeah.
So okay, I will call Farah Nisa. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
So we can slow down the spread of viral variants by following the health protocols such as masking and all social distancing, as well as washing our hands, using disinfectants, and most of all is by signing on vaccines if it's already applicable in your place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your answer. So, Dr. Alex, what do you think about the answer?
That was the perfect answer. She got it completely correct.
Okay, thank you so much. Congratulations to Farhanisa, your answer is right, and our committee will contact you soon for the prize. Okay, so guys, this is the end of our quiz section. Thank you so much for your participation and also assignment to this quiz section. And now we move on to the surprise. Wait a minute. Okay, now surprisingly, there is something special for you guys. Yes, we will watch a very exciting performance from student activity unit of UKM, the Sport University of Indonesia. The Sport UI itself was a project created by Ikatan Olahraga Dansa Indonesia and is united with Universitas Indonesia. Then Sport UI opened the way for students in Universitas Indonesia to learn this unique sport for free and could find prospective of self to compete in the championship. Dan Sport UI has performed cha-cha, samba, paso doble, jive, waltz, tango, piano waltz, clover, quick step, salsa, and Argentino tango. For your information, Professor Usman Tambunan, one of our speakers for today, is the one of the advisor at UKM Dan Sport UI. So, without any further ado, let's give our best virtual applause for Latin dance. Okay. Wow, that was a very great performance. Let's give our best virtual applause for Latin dance. So guys, if you are one of the Universitas student, I think joining UKM Dance Sport UI will be an exciting and precious experience for you. So once again, thank you very much Dance Sport UI for the performance. And I would like to remind you to for the winner of the quiz before to check your chat box because our committee have informed you about the prize. And now we come to the end of this event.
It has been our pleasure to be your MC today. May this event can give you some new information and knowledge about our biggest problem right now, COVID-19. And we hope the situation will get better as soon as possible. I want to remind you to fill the feedback form through the link for the certificate, and the certificate will be sent through your email day +7 after this event. On behalf of Public Lecture 2021, thank you all for making time to join us here today. Wish you all a pleasant day and please stay safe. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alexandra. Thank you. Thank you. Take care then, yes.
Yes.
My student proposed to visit Kansas for next September, yes.
Halo teman-teman. Kalau ini sebenarnya udah kita semua ya, udah tinggal kita aja ya, anak-anak kelas.
Ini tinggal kita